Hi, I'm Professor Wayne Miller, and this brief video is a short introduction to my course on world religions. I hope those who are watching it, whether you're one of my students or you're just arrived here after looking for something on religious studies, I hope you'll find it useful and perhaps thought-provoking to some degree. Whenever you're studying any subject, whether it's in science or the humanities or religion, it's good to try to have some sort of definition of what it is you're looking at. One of the problems with defining religion, however, is that there are so many different religions. There are at least 12 major religions in the world, and if you look up an article online about religions, you'll find that there are hundreds of different religions, actually. And they have many differences. Some are monotheistic, some are polytheistic, some believe God is transcendent, some believe that God is immanent in the creation. That means dwelling in the creation. I-M-M-A-N-E-N-T. Immanent means dwelling within the creation. There are many different attitudes toward God or perceptions of the divine or the transcendent or whatever brings meaning and purpose to this world. So therefore, scholars have decided it's kind of difficult to create a single definition which would encompass all religions. However, there are ways to look at the various elements which are found in most religions. For example, most religions have a specific worldview. They think that human life is either determined to some degree by a divine creator with a specific goal in mind, whereas other religions feel that human life is simply living in this world, and there is perhaps a cosmic origin or a divine force or energy, but not necessarily with a purpose, not necessarily with an individual purpose in any way. So the worldview, whether you think that God is a personal God who created you for a purpose and is guiding history, that's one kind of God. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, for example, feel that this is the case with human life, that the God of the Old Testament, New Testament, the God of Islam, is a transcendent deity, a sacred deity who lives above and beyond this world. And we can have different descriptions of God. God is all powerful, all merciful, forgiving, compassionate, just. There are many different adjectives which have been attached to the divine, but most of the monotheistic religions of the West feel that God is transcendent, meaning God is above and beyond all our descriptions. God cannot be defined by human intellect alone. And also, Western religion, when I say Western, I mean Judeo-Christianity and Islam, which are Western in relation to the Far East. Western religion definitely believes God created the universe for a purpose, and that human beings have a specific purpose and goal for their life, and by studying the scriptures or listening to prophets or reading the teachings of Jesus or Moses or Muhammad will give us an understanding of how to achieve God's purpose for our life. Other religions, such as Taoism, doesn't feel there's a specific purpose to an individual life other than to live in harmony with the creation, with the natural world around us. Or Confucius taught that it was important to live in harmony with our social structure. So it was very important to understand the proper hierarchy of family, society, king, nation, whatever, and to live in a harmonious fashion, giving the right respect where it is due, and receiving guidance or support from elders, from those above us, around us. So that's a very different view of the purpose of religion. Again, one is we're supposed to understand the teachings of, say, Muhammad or Jesus or Moses and carry out those teachings in our life. Whereas Lao Tzu, who founded supposedly Taoism, said that no, the important thing is to live naturally, to live in harmony. That was very big in the 60s. The hippies liked that. Oh, yeah, just live naturally, man. but I really don't think they really understood Taoism. Taoism can actually help people to become extremely proficient at what they do. There are stories in Taoism of a of a butcher who could carve a cow with like 12 slices of his sword or his whatever cleaver, because he was so in tune with his body and with what he was doing. So Taoism doesn't mean being sloppy or lazy. It means being totally in tune with yourself and with what's around you. If you've ever seen a really proficient martial artist like Jackie Chan or Steven Seagal, their movement is incredibly fluid, and that's sort of what Taoism is about, making sure that your actions have no wasted motion, to be really, really proficient and really in tune with yourself and everything's going on around you. Okay, so we have this situation of worldview. What is the worldview of a specific way of life, a specific religion? Even atheism, agnosticism, people who are non-theism, all of these, in one sense, are worldviews. So you could call them religions from a certain perspective because people adhere to this. Oh, I'm an atheist. I don't believe there's any purpose. That's how I live my life. In addition to that, there are many other elements that occur in what is called religion. For example, many religions have a specific religious text. You know, in Judaism, it's the Old Testament. In Islam, it's the Quran. In Christianity, it's the Old and New Testament together. Hinduism has the Vedas, the Vedic scriptures. But there are many indigenous religions which have oral traditions but no written texts. Even Hinduism, for many, many, many millennia, did not have written texts. Everything was transmitted orally from priest to follower or father to son. This went on for ages. The concept of a sacred text was foreign to Hinduism because they felt if you write it down, you'll forget it. But if you memorize it, you won't forget it. So for like 3 or 4 or 5 millennia, the Hindu religion, the priests just memorized the scriptures, the Vedic scriptures. There are other things which are sort of central to many religions. The idea of sacred time or sacred space. Even in the New Testament, it distinguishes between, if you read it in the Greek, it distinguishes between kairos and chronos. Chronos, like chronology or chronometer. Chronos means ordinary time, 24 hours a day, 60 minutes in an hour. But kairos, Kairos, means special time, the time. Jesus said, for example, you don't receive me because you did not know the time of my coming. In other words, the important sacred time of my coming. Some religions believe that time is circular. There's something called the myth of the eternal return, which is a book by Mircea Eliade, a very famous Romanian scholar. And he spoke about the fact that certain religions believe that there's a cycle of things that renews life. This is all part of religion. But because religions are so different in the way they apply these concepts, it's very difficult to find a definition which will fit all religions. For example, most religions have codes of ethics, what is right, what is wrong, but not all. One thing that is true of most all religions is the belief that there is something sacred or otherworldly about the universe. There's something about this universe which transcends the ordinary life. Even religions which don't believe in a creator God still believe there's something, there's some force, there's some power that, in Taoism it's the Tao or the Tao, D-A-O or T-A-O, depending on how you spell it. It's important to live in harmony with that force of the universe. Many religions are animistic. They believe that there are sacred places and sacred trees and sacred rocks and sacred mountains. In Judaism and Christianity, Islam, sacredness belongs to God. So there may be synagogues or mosques or churches where you feel closer to God, but ultimately God is transcendent and above and beyond this world. All of this thinking leads to the question of, well, where does religion come from? Why are there religions? Why do people feel religion is important? There are so many religious leaders and prophets and figures who have appeared. The question is, where did these people, where did their desire to profess their belief come from? Why are there people who did this? And another thing that's really important to understand, or to at least consider, maybe it's not that human beings are looking for the divine, but maybe it's the other way around, that there is a divine origin which is looking for us. For example, 500 years before the birth of Jesus, there's something which historians call the axis age, or the axial age. It's an age of turning, like on an axis, right? In 7th century or 8th century BC, you have prophets in Israel talking about the importance of honoring God. And the prophet Hosea, for example, saying that God, despite all the rules and regulations in the Old Testament, Hosea says in chapter 6, verse 6, God desires mercy, not sacrifice. God wants people to be good to each other. In a similar time period, you have in Hinduism sort of a rebellion against the priestly caste, because Vedic Hinduism, based upon the Vedic scriptures or the Vedic tradition, the priests taught that the only right religion was the religion that took place, in holy places, ordained by priests and carried out by priests. But around this time, starting around 500 BC, you have the Upanishads, which is a series of writings which say, no, ordinary people can follow their own path. They can find a guru, they can go into the woods, they can travel as an ascetic or a mystic. They can find their own relationship to the divine. This rebellion or push against priestly religion becomes even more apparent, not only in the Upanishads, but in the Bhagavad Gita, which comes a little bit later, in which you find there's a prince, Arjuna, who is leading his family in a battle against his cousins who are trying to usurp his power, his kingdom, trying to dethrone him, take over the kingdom. And at one point, he becomes really depressed and dejected because he's fighting against his cousins. He doesn't like it. He starts weeping. He throws down his weapons and he sits down and he's distraught. And his chariot driver, Krishna, whom we later find out is the avatar or embodiment of Vishnu, the preserver god, Krishna tells him that he has to do his duty, that the right thing for a prince to do is to do what's right, and that means to do his duty to preserve his kingdom. So even if it means fighting against his relatives, that's a noble thing when it's done for the right reason, not selfishly, but on behalf of his kingdom. And so later we find out that Krishna is Vishnu. And so this leads to the concept of karma yoga, or doing your duty, what's called dharma, D-H-A-R-M-A. Dharma means doing what you need to do, but do it unselfishly. So your dharma is your duty. Whatever phase of life you're in, you have a certain duty, whether it's a student or as a married person or whatever it is, you have a certain duty, and that's what brings you greater freedom. The idea also, of course, in Hinduism, they believe in reincarnation. So if you do your duty properly, unselfishly, when you die, you'll be elevated to a higher realm. And eventually you can escape this world of rebirth altogether. Around the same time as the Upanishads, you have Buddha, who arose. His parents were very powerful kings in their region, and a holy man told his parents that if he sees, if he's sheltered from suffering and death and disease, he will become a great king. But if he's exposed to disease and suffering, if he sees it, he will become a religious leader. So his parents wanted him to become a king. He wanted to inherit their kingdom. So they kept him in their estate, in a big palace with lots of grounds, and he was not allowed to go beyond that. But one day he snuck off, went into the local city, and he saw what's called the four great sights. Number one, he saw an elderly person, a very old person. He'd never seen such an old person. In his parents' estate, whenever a person got older, they would just ship them off and bring a young person. So he only saw young people. But he saw an old person. Then he saw a very, very sick person who's really in bad shape. He'd never seen this before. It shocked him to his core. Then he saw a dead body, a guy just dead on the street. It really, really shook him to his core. And then he saw a holy man sitting there and meditating, extremely peaceful, extremely unburdened by the world. So this caused Buddha to go off. He left home and went off in search for what is the way, what causes suffering, he wanted to know, and how do I prevent suffering. And he finally determined that the cause of suffering was desire, attachment to things, and I want money, I want power, I want position, I want this, I want that. And the way to find freedom was to be detached from all these selfish desires. And so he went through a lot of experiences, at one point being very ascetic, eating almost nothing, almost dying. And then he realized that wasn't the way either. But he needed to be detached from selfishness. And this was his enlightenment. And the word Buddha means the enlightened, to be enlightened. So this is the same time as the Upanishads were being written. There was also, around the same time, Confucius, who came up with his idea that the way to be really peaceful in our world was to have peaceful relationships with our society, with our family, with our king, our relatives. And that meant understanding proper order, proper relationships. Shortly after that was also Lao Tzu, who developed Taoism. And his idea was, he didn't like society all that much. He said the best thing to do is to get out into nature and to become one with nature. And he really believed that you could really develop a tremendous inner peace if you could just become one with the world around you. Then, around that time or shortly thereafter, the Greek philosophers arose, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and others, who all talked about what is the right way of life. How do we live? What does it mean to live a good life? Socrates said an unexamined life is not worth living. What did he mean? He meant we'd have to look at ourselves and understand who we are and what we need and what is right to do and what's wrong to do. All of these different movements and all these different people arose just about 400 or 500 years before Jesus, and it was worldwide, from the Far East to the Middle East, the whole known world. So a question I have to ask is why did this happen all at the same time? Is it just chance? Or is there something going on? Then 2,000 years later, around 1415, 1600 AD, we have the Renaissance, the Reformation, which throws everything into turmoil in terms of religion. And you have the Enlightenment. You have people like Isaac Newton and Leibniz, who both, living in different countries, came up with calculus at the same time. And Newton's theories of physics and math revolutionized the world of science. And much of what we have today is a direct result of what Newton taught and wrote, and others after him. I mean, it's unbelievable. So the question is, why do these things happen? How do these worldwide movements suddenly spring up out of somewhere, nowhere? I mean, you can go hundreds of years with very little change, and suddenly there's a dramatic change. So are people looking for the divine, or is the divine looking for us? This is a question I think is important to consider. Many so-called scholars don't want to question anything that they can't see. Oh, if I can't see it and I can't measure it, it doesn't exist. That's not true. If you look out your window, you can't see the wind, but you can see the effect on the trees. You can't see photons, but you can see what happens when the sun shines on a car in the summertime. It gets very hot inside. So there, you can see the effects, even though you can't necessarily always see the cause. Of course, you can see the sun, but what I'm saying is there are cosmic rays, there are X-rays, there's all sorts of things that we could not see in the past. Doesn't mean they don't exist. They do exist. So we need to think about these things and not just push off stuff that, well, I don't want to talk about that because I can't measure it. That's not really scientific. That's not academic. That's pseudo-academic. Um, but in terms of religion, there are some books I could recommend to people who are interested to help you understand the different practices of religion and different emotional aspects of religion. For example, Rudolf Otto, Rudolf Otto, a German scholar 100 years or so, who wrote a book called The Idea of the Holy. And he said that the religion arises when people have an experience of God. He calls it numinous awe, the experience of just being awestruck in relation to some sort of supernatural experience. He called that experience the mysterium tremendum et fascinans, meaning this mysterious event which causes us to shake with just trepidation, tremendum, to shake, but it's also fascinating, awe-inspiring. It could be dread, it could be guilt, it could be liberation, it could be rebirth. There are many different emotional components to this. But this is very important in Rudolf Otto's writings, that that which is religious arises from this profound emotional experience. There's also a couple of books by Mircea Eliade. I mentioned him, Mircea Eliade. He's a very important scholar of religion from Romania. He wrote several books, but two that spring to my mind are The Myth of the Eternal Return. It talks about indigenous religions which have this cyclical view of history, that life is renewed every so often through this return to certain things that happen which revolutionize our world and restore it, renew it to its to the starting point. And there's also another book called The Sacred and the Profane, in which he discusses the concept of sacred space and ordinary space, sacred time and ordinary time. Those are both very good books if somebody wants to read them. They're quite interesting. So for me, one important question is, why do we study religion? Personally, I feel that study of religion is important because we need to understand, to the best of our ability, what is the universe all about? Is there a divine origin? Is there something going on beyond us? Is there some force or energy or creator who's directing us to some degree or not? We should think about that and think about what does that mean for us if that in fact is true. Then secondly, what we need to think about is the fact that the world is smaller today than ever before. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that because of electronic technology, television, telephone, radio, cell phones, internet technology, etc., computers, we can communicate almost instantaneously with anyone, anywhere in the world. Just pick up your phone, dial a number, and you're talking to someone who's 10 or 12,000 miles away. It's quite astonishing, really. And as a result of that, the world is very small. We're very much in connection with everybody everywhere. So it would be best for us if we could live peacefully with people, whether they live next door or around the world. It would be good for us to live in peace. And in order to live in peace, we need to understand one another. We need to understand our neighbors. Why does this person dress this way? Why does this person, not eat meat? Or why does this person eat fish on Fridays? Or why does this person wear a red dot on their forehead? Or different things. What are the different practices? If we understand religion, Karl Marx said that your society is based upon your economic structure. But 100 years ago, a very famous German sociologist, in fact, sort of the father of sociology, Max Weber, that's spelled Maxweber, looks like Max Weber, but in German it's Max Weber. He was a sociologist who said, it's really the religion which determines the culture, and it's the culture which determines the economics. And so the religion is the basis of everything that people do. He wrote a very good book about that, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. If we want to understand our neighbors, whether they live next door or around the world, we need to understand what motivates them, why they do the things they do, And so understanding their religion is extremely helpful. Now, and about that, we also need to ask ourselves a question. Do we want to look at people or religions as if we're in a museum or a zoo? Like, oh, this person, this animal has this kind of fur, and this animal has these antlers, and this animal does this. Or in the museum, this thing looks like that. Or do we want to actually understand what people are like? What do they think? How do they think? What does it mean to be a Muslim? What does it mean to be a Hindu? What does it mean to be a Christian or a Catholic Christian or a Protestant Christian? What does it mean to belong to the Shinto religion? And how does it feel for that person? What do they experience when they're going about their daily life? This, to me, is a very important perspective. If I could get inside somebody else's sort of worldview, how they think and how they feel, why they do what they do, it'll help people to understand each other much more than we do today. I heard some very uneducated person saying once he didn't like Muslims because they don't pray to God. I said, what? Yeah, they pray to Allah. Well, it turns out, if you study Arabic, that Allah simply means the God. So when a Muslim says, I'm praying to God, Allah, to Allah, they're praying to God. And my wife is French. In French, it's Dieu. In Korean, it's Hananim. Every language has its own word for God. Those who believe in a God pray to that God. I mean, we need to be humble and we need to be thoughtful and open-minded to understand how other people in other places, how they think and how they act, and why they believe what they believe. And that will help us to get along in this world far better than we've been doing so far. So I think that's why I like the study of religion. It helps us to understand each other, and it will also help you perhaps understand your own religious beliefs. Why does your church or your synagogue or your mosque, or why does your religion teach this or that or the other thing? A lot of times we grow up doing things or thinking things or believing things, we don't even know why. It's just that, well, our parents did this and their parents did that. Sometimes it's good to stop and say, well, why do we do that? Why do I think this way? So this is what I think is important about religion, and I hope this video is helpful to you and thought-provoking to some degree. And I hope you'll come back because I'm going to be loading more videos in the coming weeks. So thank you very much for sharing your time with me, and have a great day.